The late afternoon sun cast long, weary shadows across the Montana plains. Elias, a man whose face was etched with the silent stories of 1,000 sunsets, rode alongside his loyal companion, a German shepherd named Bear. The air, crisp and biting, carried the scent of pine and impending snow. Elias wasn't a man of many words. His life, a solitary existence since his return from the war, was one of quiet routine. He hunted, he trapped, he maintained the small isolated homestead that was his sanctuary. Bear was his shadow, his confidant, his only link to a world he felt he no longer belonged to. They were a few miles from the river, their pace slow and steady, when Bear's ears suddenly perked up. He stopped dead in his tracks, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Elias pulled on the reins of his horse, a well-worn Appaloosa named Ghost. He knew Bear's growl. It wasn't one of aggression, but one of deep, primal alarm. It was the sound of a guardian who had spotted a threat unseen. "What is it, boy?" Elias murmured, his eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing. Just the vast, empty landscape of the west. But Bear wasn't looking at the horizon. He was looking toward the river, his low growl turning into a series of frantic, insistent barks. Elias dismounted, his heart beginning to pound with a sense of unease. He knew better than to ignore Bear. The dog had saved his life more times than he cared to count. His instincts, a silent language Elias had learned to trust implicitly. He began to walk toward the riverbank, Ghost following a few paces behind. The closer they got, the more frantic Bear became, his barks echoing through the silence. Elias gripped the rifle on his back, his senses on high alert. He pushed through a thicket of willows, and there it was, the sound that had sent Bear into a frenzy. A faint, desperate cry carried on the wind, a sound so fragile it was almost lost in the rush of the water. He saw them then, 3 figures, small and almost swallowed by the powerful current. They were caught in a brutal eddy, clinging to a fallen log that was being relentlessly pummeled by the churning water. The youngest of them, a girl no older than 5, was barely holding on. Her long black hair was soaked, plastered to her small face. The 2 older girls, perhaps 10 and 13, were fighting a losing battle against the river's cold embrace, their faces pale with terror. Elias's military training kicked in, the years of quiet solitude melting away in a surge of adrenaline. He dropped his rifle, pulling a long, sturdy rope from his saddlebag. He quickly tied one end to a thick tree trunk, the other he coiled in his hand. "Hold on!" he yelled, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of the water. He didn't waste another moment. He dove into the frigid river, the shock of the cold stealing his breath. The current was brutal, pulling at him with a relentless force. He fought against it, every muscle straining, his mind focused only on the 3 small lives hanging by a thread. He reached the log, his hands gripping the rough bark. The youngest girl was whimpering, her eyes wide with fear, as she looked up at him. He gently pried her fingers from the log, wrapping his arms around her small body. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. He handed her to the oldest girl, who was now shivering violently. "Hold her tight. I'll get you out." He looked at the middle girl, her eyes fixed on his with a mixture of fear and an unnerving, almost defiant spirit. He pulled her away from the log, wrapping an arm around her waist, and began to fight his way back toward the bank. The rope became their lifeline, a thin strand of hope against the river's fury. The struggle was immense. The current fought him every inch of the way, and the water seemed determined to drag them all down. But Elias was a man built of resilience, his body hardened by years of surviving the wild. He pulled, he pushed, he swam with a strength he hadn't known he still possessed. Finally, they reached the bank, exhausted and gasping for breath. The 2 older girls, their bodies trembling, helped him pull the youngest from the water. Bear, a blur of fur and concern, was there instantly, licking their faces, nudging them with his wet nose. The 3 girls were soaked to the bone, their thin buckskin dresses clinging to their bodies. They were silent, their dark eyes fixed on Elias, a mix of gratitude and guarded suspicion in their gaze. He knelt before them, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. "You're safe now," he said, his voice raw. He looked at the middle girl, who was shivering uncontrollably. "Let's get you to a fire." He knew he couldn't leave them here. Night was falling, and the temperature was plummeting. The river's cold would be their death sentence if they stayed. He had no choice. He had to take them to his home. He had rescued them from the river, but a far greater challenge lay ahead. His dog barked. He knew why. It wasn't just about saving lives. It was about what came next. The West was a dangerous place, and he had just brought 3 Apache girls into his world, a world where their presence would be a beacon for all the wrong kind of attention. The real rescue was only just beginning. The journey back to Elias's homestead was slow and arduous. The girls, their bodies weak from the cold and shock, huddled together on Ghost's back, while Elias led the horse on foot. Bear walked ahead, his ears constantly swiveling, his protective instincts on full display. The youngest, who had yet to make a sound, was clutched tightly in the arms of her older sister. The middle one, her name a mystery, kept her gaze fixed on the path ahead, a silent warrior wrapped in a child's body. The eldest was a portrait of quiet strength, her eyes meeting Elias's from time to time with a look that spoke volumes of gratitude and profound weariness. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon by the time they reached the small log cabin. A plume of smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a welcoming sign in the encroaching darkness. Elias dismounted Ghost and carefully helped the girls down. He ushered them inside, the warmth from the hearth hitting them like a gentle wave. The cabin was Spartan but clean. A simple cot, a table, and a few chairs were all it contained, a testament to its owner's self-sufficient life. He immediately set about building up the fire, adding more logs until the flames danced and licked at the stones. He grabbed 2 rough-spun blankets from a chest and spread them out near the fire, motioning for the girls to sit. The eldest girl guided her younger sisters, her movements gentle and deliberate. They huddled together, the warmth of the fire slowly seeping into their cold bones. Elias boiled water in a cast-iron pot, his movements efficient and practiced. He had little in the way of supplies, but he had flour, dried beans, and a strip of salted venison. He began to prepare a simple, warm stew, the scent of the cooking food filling the small cabin. The girls watched him in silence, their eyes following his every move. They were wary, of course. He was a white man, a soldier who had fought against their people. The lines of war were drawn deep and long in this land, and they were the children caught in the middle. "You're safe here," Elias said quietly, his back to them as he stirred the stew. He didn't expect a response. He didn't want to press them. The trust, if it was to come, would have to be earned slowly. He served them the stew in 3 small bowls, placing them on the floor near the fire. He motioned for them to eat, and they did, but slowly at first. The eldest tasted it, then nodded to her sisters, a silent signal that it was safe. The youngest, whose name he would come to learn was Lainey, ate with a ravenous hunger, her small face lighting up with each spoonful. The middle sister, whose name was Nahimana, ate with a cool, detached grace, her eyes never leaving his. The eldest, Ilara, ate with a quiet dignity, her gaze thoughtful and observant. After they finished, he offered them fresh water. He then went to the back room, returning with 3 clean shirts and a pair of leggings he had mended. They were too big, but they were dry. He left them near the fire, then went outside to tend to Ghost and Bear, giving the girls a measure of privacy. He stood outside for a long time, the cold night air biting at his skin. Bear sat beside him, a silent sentry. The firelight flickered through the cracks in the cabin walls. Elias had always been a man alone, by choice and by circumstance. His past had made it easy to isolate himself. But now the silence of his home was filled with the soft sounds of 3 young girls, and the solitude he had so carefully cultivated was broken. He knew the danger. If anyone from the nearby town of Redemption found out he was sheltering Apache girls, the consequences would be severe. The hostility ran deep, fueled by years of conflict and the bitter sting of loss. The townsfolk would see it as a betrayal, a dangerous act that could bring trouble to their doorstep. He was a white man, but in their eyes, his actions could make him an enemy. When he finally returned to the cabin, the girls were huddled together, wrapped in the blankets, their wet clothes hanging by the fire to dry. They were still awake, their eyes half-lidded, but a little of the fear had receded. Elias simply took his place on a chair by the hearth, watching the fire, his rifle resting against the wall. He wasn't just a rescuer, he was a guardian now, and the weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. The night was cold, but the small cabin was filled with an unspoken warmth, a fragile bond forged in the chilling waters of a river. The morning sun, pale and weak, streamed through the single window of Elias's cabin, casting a golden glow on the 3 sleeping girls. They were curled together on the floor, a single intertwined form of exhausted innocence. Elias had been awake for hours, tending to his chores, his mind preoccupied with the impossibility of his new reality. He was a solitary man who now had 3 young lives in his care. He had gathered firewood, checked on his traps, and prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush. The scent of it, earthy and warm, slowly stirred the girls. The youngest, Lainey, was the first to wake, her dark eyes blinking open with a quiet confusion. The middle one, Nahimana, came to life with a jolt, her gaze immediately locking onto Elias, a silent appraisal. Ilara, the eldest, woke last, her movements slow and graceful, as if she were carrying an invisible weight. They ate in silence. Elias didn't know what to say. He had little experience with children and none at all with girls, let alone girls from a tribe his people had been at war with. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Who were they? Where was their family? How had they ended up in the river? He knew better than to ask. Not yet. The silence was their shield, and he would not be the one to break it. After they finished, he went to his small collection of supplies and pulled out a leather thong and a few beads. He handed them to Ilara. She looked at him, then at the beads, a flicker of something he couldn't name passing through her eyes. She took them, and with deft, practiced fingers, she began to braid the leather, weaving the beads into a pattern he didn't recognize. Lainey watched, her small face rapt with attention. Nahimana, meanwhile, took a small piece of charcoal from the fire and began to draw on a scrap of birch bark, her movements precise and deliberate. She drew a wolf, its eyes sharp and its posture alert. It was the best drawing he had ever seen. Elias was struck by their resilience. They had lost everything, been through a terrible ordeal, and yet here they were, finding comfort and purpose in simple acts. They were children of the wild, survivors in a world that had tried to swallow them whole. The quiet domesticity was an odd fit for his cabin, for his life. The rhythmic scrape of a knife on a whetstone was now replaced by the soft rustle of blankets and the faint sound of a child humming. He went about his work, mending a tear in his coat, cleaning his rifle. He was always aware of them, their every movement, their every silent interaction. He was a predator who had found himself guarding the most fragile of prey. The afternoon was spent in a similar fashion. He tended to his chores outside, always keeping an eye on the cabin. Bear never left their side. He was a constant, silent presence, lying by the fire, his tail occasionally thumping the floor. He was their protector, and they seemed to sense it. Lainey, the youngest, finally reached out a hesitant hand to pet his fur, and Bear responded with a gentle lick to her small hand, his large body still and calm. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Nahimana's lips as she watched the interaction. As dusk approached, Elias prepared a meager supper of boiled potatoes and what was left of the venison. The girls ate with the same quiet grace as before. After the meal, Elias took a moment to truly look at them. Their clothes were still hanging by the fire, but they had cleaned themselves, their faces scrubbed, their hair neatly braided. Ilara had given her leggings to Lainey, and they were trying to mend their clothes with what little they had. It was a sign of their resourcefulness, their will to survive. He looked at Ilara, her face pale but resolute. What are your names?" he asked softly, his voice a low rumble in the quiet cabin. He had been so careful not to intrude, but he needed to know. Ilara looked at her sisters. Lainey, now leaning against Nahimana, watched him with wide, trusting eyes. Nahimana's gaze was as cool and assessing as ever. Ilara took a breath. "I am Ilara," she said, her voice a whisper of wind. "This is Nahimana," she gestured to the middle girl, "and our youngest sister is Lainey." Elias nodded. Their names, their reality, settled in the air between them. He finally had names for the silent lives that had intruded upon his. The silence was finally broken, not with a roar, but with a whisper. He knew now that this was more than just a temporary refuge. He had taken on a family, a responsibility that would change the course of his life and theirs. The quiet of his cabin had been shattered, and in its place, a fragile new life was beginning to take shape. The danger, though, was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. The days turned into a week, each one a careful dance between Elias and the 3 girls. They had settled into a routine, a quiet rhythm of life that felt both strange and natural. Ilara, the eldest, was a pillar of quiet strength. She took care of her sisters, her movements efficient and her gaze sharp. She helped Elias with small chores, gathering berries and herbs she knew were edible, her knowledge of the land a surprising and valuable asset. Nahimana, the middle sister, was a whirlwind of energy, despite her initial guardedness. She was quick to learn, her hands busy with carving small figures out of wood, and her eyes always watching, always assessing. Lainey, the youngest, was the light in the cabin. Her giggles, soft at first, became more frequent, her small voice a melody that filled the previously silent air. She adored Bear, and the dog had become her constant companion. Elias's quiet life was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer just surviving, he was providing. He taught them to handle a small slingshot, to identify different animal tracks, and to build a proper fire. He saw in them a resilience that was both humbling and inspiring. They were survivors, not victims. They were fighters, and he, an old soldier, recognized that spirit. One afternoon, while Elias was checking his traps, he saw a rider in the distance. His heart seized. He immediately signaled Bear, who was with him. "Stay," he commanded, his voice a low growl. Bear sank to the ground, his body low, hidden in the tall grass. Elias took cover behind a large boulder, his rifle ready. The rider was moving fast, a dark speck on the horizon. He was heading south, away from Elias's homestead, but the sight of a stranger in this isolated territory set off alarm bells. This was not a place for casual travelers. He waited until the rider was a distant memory before he returned home. The girls were inside, busy with their own tasks. He told them nothing. He knew the world outside his cabin was dangerous, and he didn't want to plant seeds of fear in their already fragile lives. But he began to take more precautions. He moved the horses further into the woods, camouflaged the trail to his cabin, and kept his rifle by his side at all times. He was a man prepared for war, and he was beginning to feel that a new kind of war was brewing. The next day, Elias rode into the small town of Redemption for supplies. The air was thick with tension. The town was a collection of rough, weathered buildings, a testament to the harsh realities of the West. People eyed him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. He was known as the Hermit, a man who kept to himself. The town sheriff, a grizzled old man named Silas, approached him in front of the general store. "Elias," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. "Heard you've been staying away from folks more than usual." Elias met his gaze, his face a neutral mask. "Just been busy, Silas." Silas nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "A few riders passed through town a few days ago, looked like bounty hunters, said they were looking for some runaway Apache. Heard a family was wiped out up north, kids disappeared." Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He kept his expression impassive. "Apache have been moving through the territories for months, Silas. Nothing new." "They had a description," Silas continued, his voice softer, more serious. "3 girls, 2 older ones and a little one, said the river might have taken them, but they were looking for a sign." Elias felt a cold dread wash over him. His mind went back to the river, to the 3 small figures fighting for their lives. The pieces were starting to fit together. He had rescued them, but in doing so he had placed a target on his back and theirs. The bounty hunters weren't just looking for runaways, they were looking for the last living members of a family, perhaps for a reason more sinister than a simple reward. "Hope you didn't see anything," Silas said, his eyes now direct and knowing. "Bounty hunters can be messy." Elias returned his gaze steadily. "I haven't seen anything, Silas." "You know I keep to myself." Silas gave him a long, hard look, then clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. Stay that way, Elias. It's a dangerous world out there." As Elias rode out of town, a sense of urgency seized him. The bounty hunters were getting closer. He had to be smarter, faster. He had to protect the girls. The danger wasn't just a threat from the river anymore. It was a human threat, one that hunted with a cruel and relentless purpose. The bounty hunters knew the girls were alive, and they were looking for a sign of their survival. Elias had to make sure there were no signs to find. His isolated life was now a fortress, and he was its sole defender. He had to prepare for a siege. The return to the cabin felt different. The familiar trail, the tall pines, the sound of the wind through the leaves, it all seemed to pulse with a new, menacing energy. The conversation with Sheriff Silas had left a cold dread in Elias's gut. He was no longer just a protector. He was a guardian in hiding. The girls were a secret he had to keep at all costs. He rode Ghost back into the small clearing and dismounted, his senses on high alert. He saw the girls through the window, their small forms a testament to the fragile life he was now responsible for. He had to tell them. He couldn't keep the danger a secret, not if they were to survive. He entered the cabin, his face a grim mask. The girls immediately sensed the change in him. The playful atmosphere of the past few days evaporated, replaced by a tense silence. Ilara looked at him, her eyes wide with a question he had to answer. "I went to town," he began, his voice low and steady. "I saw people looking for you." Ilara's face paled. Nahimana's hand instinctively went to Lainey's arm, her body tensing. Lainey, seeing the fear in her sister's eyes, stopped humming and looked at Elias with a small, worried frown. "Bounty hunters," Elias continued. "They're looking for 3 girls. They know you survived." He saw the fear in their eyes, the understanding of what that meant. They weren't just lost children. They were a prize. Ilara took a deep breath, her small shoulders straightening. "Why?" she asked, her voice surprisingly strong. "Why are they looking for us?" Elias had been asking himself the same question. The bounty hunter's motive was unclear. It wasn't a simple kidnapping, or they wouldn't be looking for them in the river. "I don't know, they didn't say. But they're looking for a sign that you're alive. We have to be more careful. No more fires during the day. We'll only burn wood at night, and we'll have to be quiet. Very quiet." Ilara translated his words to Nahimana and Lainey in their native tongue. The sisters listened intently, their faces solemn. Lainey began to cry, small, silent tears that broke Elias's heart. He knelt down, his large hand gently resting on her head. "It's okay, little one," he murmured. "We'll be okay. We'll be safe." That evening, the cabin was a place of quiet purpose. Elias taught the girls how to move silently, how to listen for the faint snap of a twig or the distant sound of a horse. He showed them how to recognize a good hiding spot and how to stay calm when danger was near. His training from the war, the lessons in survival he had learned in the most brutal of circumstances, were now their only hope. Nahimana proved to be a quick study. She was a natural observer, her sharp eyes picking up on details Elias had missed. She noticed the way the wind carried sound and the specific cries of the different birds in the forest. She was a hunter in her own right, with a keen sense of her surroundings. One night, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Ilara asked him a question that he had been dreading. "Why do you help us? They say your people fought us." Elias looked at the flames, his mind traveling back to the war, to the days of smoke and blood. He had fought, yes, he had killed. He had seen too much hatred and too much death. He had seen families ripped apart, tribes destroyed. He had seen the ugly side of humanity, and he had come to hate it. "Because," he said, his voice raw with a pain that was a lifetime old, "there's a difference between a soldier and a man. A soldier follows orders. A man does what's right. And what's right is helping 3 children who have lost everything. What's right is protecting life, not taking it." Ilara watched him, her eyes a mirror of his own weariness. She saw the truth in his words, the deep pain that his face held. She saw the war in his eyes, a war that had never really ended. She saw a man who had chosen to be different, to stand on his own against the tide of hate. His past, a shadow that had haunted him for years, had finally found a new purpose. The skills he had learned to destroy, he was now using to protect. The rage that had once fueled him was now a quiet protective fire in his belly. He had rescued them from the river, but he had found his own redemption in the process. The bounty hunters were coming, but he was ready. He had something to fight for now. 3 small lives, 3 silent promises. The ghost of his past was finally laid to rest, and in its place a warrior had returned. The days that followed were a testament to the fragile peace they had forged. The cabin, once a place of solitary silence, now buzzed with a quiet, purposeful energy. Elias spent his days hunting and setting traps, always with an ear for any sound that didn't belong. He taught Ilara how to reload a rifle and clean it, and he showed Nahimana how to set snares. He didn't want them to be helpless. He wanted them to be ready, to be survivors. Lainey, the youngest, was a constant source of joy. Her laugh, a small bell-like sound, would echo through the cabin. She had an uncanny ability to find small, forgotten things in the woods, a perfect riverstone, a feather from a hawk. She would bring them to Elias, her small hand outstretched in a silent offering. He would take them and put them in a small pouch, a collection of treasures that spoke of a world beyond the constant fear. Their bond was growing, a fragile, unspoken thread that wove them all together. Elias found himself sharing stories of his life before the war, of a time when the world was simpler. He spoke of his childhood in the mountains, of fishing with his father, of the quiet beauty of the wild. He saw in their eyes a thirst for stories, for a connection to a world that had been stolen from them. One afternoon, as a light rain fell, Elara approached him with a small woven basket. "This is for you," she said, her voice soft. "It is a gift from our tribe." Elias took the basket, his fingers tracing the intricate pattern. It was beautiful, a testament to a culture he had only ever known through the lens of war. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't know what to do with the gift. It felt too precious to be used, too personal. He placed it on a high shelf, a reminder of the kindness he had been shown. The following morning, as Elias was getting ready to head out, he noticed Lainey was missing. A cold terror seized him. He had been so careful. Had she wandered off? Had someone taken her? His heart pounded in his chest as he called her name, his voice a panicked whisper. Elara and Nahimana were frantic. They spread out, searching the small clearing, their cries of "Lainey" becoming more desperate with each passing moment. Bear, sensing their distress, began to sniff the ground, his tail low, his ears drooping. Elias followed him, his rifle ready. They searched for an hour, the rain from the night before making the ground slick and difficult to track. Just as a sickening despair began to set in, Bear let out a low bark. He had found her. She was in the small lean-to where Elias kept his firewood, curled up with his old worn jacket. She was not crying. She was simply huddled in the darkness, a small, lost thing. When Elias reached her, she didn't look up. He gently pulled her into his arms, her body trembling with a silent fear he couldn't comprehend. "What is it, Lainey?" he whispered, his voice full of concern. "Why did you hide?" She shook her head, her small face buried in his shoulder. Elara and Nahimana found them, and a wave of relief washed over their faces. Elara knelt beside them, her hand stroking Lainey's hair. Lainey finally spoke, her voice a tiny, almost inaudible sound. "They took our mother from a place like this," she said, her voice trembling. "They came in the night. The place was safe, until it wasn't." Elias held her tighter, his mind reeling. The cabin. She had associated the cabin, his home, with a past tragedy. He hadn't just rescued them. He had brought them to a place that reminded them of their greatest loss. He had thought he was a haven, but to Lainey, he was a ticking time bomb, a symbol of the very danger they had escaped. He looked at Elara, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, confirming Lainey's words. Their family had been taken from their home. The memory was too raw, too painful for the little one. Elias held Lainey until her trembling subsided. He carried her back into the cabin, a new understanding settling over him. It wasn't just physical danger he had to protect them from, it was the psychological scars of their past. He had to make his home a sanctuary, a place where the shadows of their memories could not follow them. The bounty hunters were a threat, but so were the ghosts of the past. He had to fight both. He had to be a fortress, not just of wood and stone, but of trust and safety. And that, he knew, was the hardest battle of all. The sense of a ticking clock grew louder with each passing day. Elias knew he couldn't stay completely isolated. He needed supplies, flour, salt, ammunition. The girls needed provisions, things he couldn't hunt or gather in the wild. He had to go back to redemption, but this time he was a different man. He was a man with a secret, a man with a target on his back. He left the girls with strict instructions. He had moved his horses and supplies deeper into the woods, camouflaging them with branches and leaves. The girls were to stay hidden, to not make a sound, no matter what. Bear was to be their guard, a silent, watchful protector. The ride into town was tense. Elias's senses were on high alert, every rustle of leaves, every distant sound of a hoofbeat setting him on edge. The small town was bustling, the usual mix of ranchers, trappers, and a few weary travelers. But as he dismounted Ghost, he felt a new energy in the air, a different kind of tension. There were more strangers in town than usual, men with hard eyes and long rifles, their presence a silent proclamation of their profession. He went to the general store, his hands clenching at his sides. The store owner, a kind man named Jed, looked at him with a knowing look. "Elias," he said, his voice low, "glad to see you're still around. Some of these new fellows have been asking about you." Elias feigned ignorance. "Why's that, Jed?" "They're bounty hunters, Elias. They heard a rumor that some Apache girls might have been saved from the river. They're looking for a man who lives alone, a hermit. Said they'd pay a pretty penny for any information." A cold sweat beaded on Elias's forehead. The description was too specific. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them you're a decent man who keeps to himself. Told them to leave you be," Jed said, his gaze firm. "But they don't give up easy. They're asking questions everywhere. Asking if anyone's seen a man with a big dog. The dog's a giveaway, Elias." Elias knew. Bear was an unusual dog for the West, a breed not common outside of the military. He had to get rid of him. Not forever, but for a while. He couldn't risk Bear leading the bounty hunters to the girls. As he was paying for his supplies, two men entered the store. They were tall, gaunt, their faces unshaven and their eyes cold. One of them, a man with a scar running down his cheek, looked at Elias. "You the hermit fella?" the scarred man asked, his voice a low sneer. Elias kept his face neutral. "I'm a man who lives on his own. That's all you need to know." "Well, we hear you've been seen near the river," the man continued, his eyes a cold calculation. "Heard you might have seen something." "I'm a trapper," Elias said, his voice calm. "I see a lot of things, and I forget most of them." The scarred man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I'd reconsider that, mister. There's a lot of money to be made from a memory." Elias didn't respond. He simply picked up his supplies and left the store, his heart a drum against his ribs. He knew the bounty hunters were suspicious. He knew they wouldn't give up. He had to think fast, to throw them off his scent. He rode Ghost toward the outskirts of town, but instead of heading home, he took a different, more circuitous route. He rode for miles in a large circle, laying down a false trail, a path that would lead them away from his homestead. He would have to leave Bear behind in the woods at a predetermined spot and return for him later. It was a risky plan, but it was the only one he had. As he rode, he thought about the girls, about their silent trust. He had brought them to safety, but now that safety was more fragile than ever. The West was not a place for kindness. It was a place for survival, and survival often came at a terrible price. He was prepared to pay it. He was a soldier again, but this time he was fighting a war of his own. He was fighting for 3 lives that had become his entire world, and he would not lose. Elias returned to the cabin under the cover of a moonless night. The journey had been long and exhausting, but the false trail he had laid was a necessary diversion. He had left Bear in a small cave he knew of, a safe place hidden deep in the forest. He would go back for him in a few days, once the bounty hunters had moved on. The silence of the cabin, which had once been his comfort, now felt like a gaping wound. Bear's absence was a physical ache. He entered the cabin to find the girls huddled together near the cold hearth. They immediately sensed his tension. Ilara looked at him, her eyes searching for an answer. "Bear?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Elias shook his head, a gesture that brought a wave of silent sadness over the girls. "He's safe," Elias said, his voice flat. "But he can't be here. Not for a while. It's too dangerous. The bounty hunters, they're close. They know about him." Lainey began to cry, small heart-wrenching sobs. The dog had been her constant comfort, a furry anchor in her new, terrifying world. Elias knelt, pulling her into his arms. "It's okay, little one," he murmured. "He'll be back. I promise. He's doing his job. He's keeping us safe." That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, his rifle in his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. He had a premonition, a soldier's instinct that had saved his life more than once. The bounty hunters were not fools. They would be looking for a man alone, but they would also be looking for any signs of recent activity. They would be looking for a trail, a fire, anything. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, he saw it. A faint wisp of smoke a mile or so to the north. It was a campfire. It was a trap. They were trying to lure him out to see if he would respond. A less cautious man might have ridden toward the smoke, thinking it was a lost traveler. But Elias knew better. He had set his own traps, and he knew how they worked. He turned to the girls. "They're here," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They've set a trap. They'll be watching the roads, the trails. We have to be ready." Ilara's face was pale, but she nodded. She was a quick learner, and she had seen the fear in his eyes. She knew the seriousness of the situation. Nahimana, her face a mask of determination, went to the small pouch where she kept her carved figures. She pulled out a small, wolf-like creature, its face a snarl. It was a symbol of her resilience, a reminder of the fight they had in them. Elias began to prepare for a siege. He brought in all the firewood, all the water. He barricaded the cabin door and windows, leaving only small slits to see out of. They would have to stay inside, to be completely silent, to become ghosts in their own home. The day stretched on, an eternity of quiet, tense waiting. The girls were quiet, their small voices hushed, their movements a silent ballet. They knew what was at stake, their lives. Elias watched the forest, his heart a constant drum, his mind racing. He had to outwit them. He had to be smarter, faster, more ruthless. As dusk began to fall, he saw movement. A shadow, then another. They were approaching from the woods, 2 men, their rifles held low. They were moving stealthily, their eyes on the cabin. Elias's hands tightened around his rifle. He had set a small perimeter of tripwires, thin leather thongs tied to bells he had scavenged from a discarded pack. He heard the faint jingle of a bell, then a curse. The bounty hunters were there. They were looking for a sign, and he had given them one. He waited, his finger on the trigger. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't a man who sought conflict, but he was a protector, and he would not let them take the girls. He would fight until his last breath. The ghosts of his past were watching, but so were the 3 lives he had sworn to protect. The battle for their future was about to begin, and he was ready for war. The night air was thick with tension. The sound of the tripwire had been the opening bell for a silent, deadly game. Elias watched from a narrow slit in the cabin wall, his breath held in his lungs. He could hear them now, 2 shadows circling the cabin, their movements slow and deliberate. They were testing the waters, looking for a weakness, a way in. He was ready. He had a plan, a desperate final gamble. He waited until they were on opposite sides of the cabin, their movements obscured by the thick shadows of the pines. He took a deep breath, his mind a steel trap of focus. He had placed a small, almost undetectable pile of dry leaves and pine needles near the base of the cabin wall. He struck a match, and a small flame erupted, licking at the dry kindling. It was a risk, a calculated one. The smoke would draw their attention, force them to act. The tactic worked. He heard one of the men curse as he saw the smoke. "He's in there," he hissed. "Let's get him." They converged on the cabin, their rifles raised. Elias waited, his hand on a loose stone he had placed near the window. As the first man neared the window, he threw the stone with all his might. The sound of the impact a loud crack in the night. The man flinched, his head turning toward the sound. In that split second, Elias had his chance. He fired. The sound of the rifle a deafening roar in the quiet night. The man fell, his rifle clattering to the ground. The second man, caught off guard, stumbled back, his eyes wide with surprise. He had expected an easy target, a hermit who would surrender. He had underestimated the soldier within. Elias didn't give him time to recover. He moved with a speed and ferocity that had been honed on the battlefield. He burst through the cabin door, his movements a blur of controlled aggression. The second man raised his rifle, but Elias was too fast. He tackled him, the 2 of them a tangled mess of limbs and angry curses. Elias was a seasoned fighter, his body a testament to a brutal past. He disarmed the man, a swift, practiced motion, and pinned him to the ground, his forearm a vice on the man's throat. The man struggled, his face turning a mottled purple. "You're a fool," he rasped. "There are more of us. You can't hide from us all." Elias looked at him, his eyes hard and cold. "Maybe not," he said, his voice a low growl. "But I'll make sure you're the last one of them who finds me." He tightened his grip, and the man's struggles ceased. Elias got to his feet, his chest heaving. The cabin was silent, the girls watching from the darkness, their small faces pale with a mixture of fear and awe. He had won, for now. But the man's words echoed in his mind. There were more of them. He dragged the 2 bodies into the woods, his mind already working on a new plan. He had to be gone by morning. He couldn't stay here. The place was compromised. He had to move, to find a new sanctuary, a new place to hide. He returned to the cabin, his hands covered in dirt and blood. He found Ilara by the hearth, her face a somber mask. "We need to go," he said, his voice quiet. "Now." She nodded. She already had their meager belongings packed. Nahimana was holding a sleeping Laney, her eyes fixed on him with a new kind of respect. He wasn't just a rescuer now. He was a warrior, a protector, a man who would kill to keep them safe. He quickly gathered his things, his movements efficient and practiced. He had saved them from the river, and now he had saved them from a human threat. But the journey was far from over. The West was a vast, unforgiving place, and they were alone in it. 3 small lives and a man with a past full of ghosts and a future full of uncertainty. The bounty hunters were a constant threat, but they would be outwitted. Elias would fight for the girls, for their chance at a new life, a chance he had lost long ago. He was a soldier, a guardian, and he would not rest until they were truly safe. The fight was just beginning. The cold night air bit at their faces as they left the cabin behind. Elias led the way, Ghost's hooves muffled by the thick pine needles on the forest floor. Elara and Nahimana rode the horse, Laney sleeping soundly, a small, trusting weight in Nahimana's arms. They were on the run now, no longer just in hiding. Elias had a destination in mind, a place he hadn't thought of in years, a remote homestead in the high desert of Arizona, a place he had known as a child. It was a long journey, fraught with a new kind of danger. He didn't look back. The cabin, his home for so many years, was now a memory, a testament to a life that no longer existed. He was no longer a hermit. He was a guardian, a protector, and his new life had a purpose that resonated in every step he took. He knew the bounty hunters would be on their trail soon. They would find the bodies and know he had gone south. He had to be quick, to be smart, to stay one step ahead. They traveled by night and rested during the day. Elias found a small hidden cave, its entrance obscured by a tangle of vines and a low overhang of rock. He lit a small fire, its smoke carefully controlled to be almost invisible. The girls were tired, their small faces smudged with dirt and weariness, but they didn't complain. They were used to hardship, used to the unforgiving nature of the land. Nahimana's quiet strength was a constant source of wonder to Elias. She was a natural leader, and her spirit, a fierce, untamed thing, was a constant reminder of the life they were fighting for. She watched him with an intensity that spoke volumes. She had seen him kill. She had seen the raw violence of the world, and she had chosen to trust him still. One afternoon, as the sun beat down on the red rock landscape, they came to a small stream. The girls, their clothes dusty and their faces pale, ran to the water. They washed their faces and drank deeply, a simple act of freedom that touched Elias's heart. He watched them, a fierce protective instinct rising within him. He would do whatever it took to keep them safe. He had to find a place to replenish their supplies. A town, perhaps, but a small one that wouldn't attract the attention of the bounty hunters. He had to be a ghost, a silent shadow moving through the land. He couldn't risk being seen, couldn't risk a new confrontation. He knew that the more he killed, the more men would come looking for him. The bounty hunters were not a single entity. They were a network, a brotherhood of violence and greed. They were still a week's journey from the high desert. Elias had to be careful, to ration their food, to be a silent shadow in the night. The nights were cold, the days hot, and the landscape, beautiful as it was a brutal reminder of the unforgiving nature of the world. He looked at Laney, her small hand clutching his finger as she slept. He had no children of his own. The war had taken his chance at a family, at a normal life. But now, he had three small, silent lives that depended on him. He wasn't a father, not in the traditional sense, but he was a protector. He was a guardian. He was a man who had found his purpose in the most unlikely of circumstances. The journey was long, but it was not just a physical one. It was a journey of the heart. Elias was no longer a man running from his past. He was a man running for his future, for the future of 3 children who had chosen to trust him with their lives. The road was long, but he would not falter. He would not stop. He would not fail them. Their lives were in his hands, and he would not let go. The Arizona desert was a brutal, beautiful place. The red rock formations rose like ancient monuments from the sandy earth, and the sun beat down with an unrelenting intensity. After a week of travel, they finally reached the high desert, the landscape a sharp contrast to the lush forests of Montana. Elias was home, in a sense. He had spent his childhood here, in a small adobe house with his family. The ghosts of his past were here, But they were kinder ghosts, full of memories of a simpler, happier time. He led them to a small, hidden spring, a place he had known since he was a boy. The water was cool and clear, a life-giving oasis in the unforgiving landscape. The girls drank deeply, their bodies weary from the journey. Elias set up a small camp, the adobe house a few miles away. He wanted to be sure. He wanted to scout it out, to make sure it was still as he remembered it. The adobe house was a ruin now, its walls crumbling, its roof caved in. It was a sad sight, a testament to the passage of time, but a good place to hide nonetheless. He could rebuild it, make it a home again. He looked at the girls. They were looking at the ruins with a quiet sense of disappointment. This wasn't a home. It was a pile of broken dreams. He went to the remains of the old well. The bucket was rusted, the rope long gone, but the well itself was still there. He would have to clean it out to make it usable again. It would be a long, arduous process, but he had to. He had to build a new life for them. Nahimana, with her usual silent purpose, began to explore the area. She found a small, rusted shovel and began to dig in the sand. Ilara, her hands busy with mending Lainey's clothes, watched her with a quiet understanding. Nahimana was a builder. She was a survivor. She was a woman in the making, and she had a fierce will to live. Lainey, meanwhile, had found a small lizard, a tiny, sun-drenched thing, and was following it with a quiet fascination. Her innocence was a sharp contrast to the harsh realities of their life. She was a reminder of what they were fighting for, a symbol of hope in a world of despair. Elias began to clear out the ruins of the adobe house. It was hard work, his muscles screaming in protest, but he was a man of the land. He knew how to build, how to create. He was a soldier, yes, but he was also a farmer, a builder, a man who could turn nothing into something. He found a few things buried in the sand, an old shovel, a rusty pickaxe, a few broken pieces of pottery. He held them in his hands, memories of his childhood flashing through his mind. His father's hands, calloused and strong, teaching him how to build, how to work the land. His mother's laugh, a soft, melodic sound that he hadn't heard in years. He was no longer running from his past. He was embracing it. He was building on it. He was turning a place of sadness into a place of hope. He had rescued them from the river, from the bounty hunters, but now he had to rescue them from the harsh realities of a life on the run. He had to build a home, a sanctuary, a place where they could be safe. The girls, seeing him work, began to help. They moved stones, cleared out the dirt, their small hands working tirelessly. They were a team, a family, a strange, broken, and beautiful family. The bounty hunters were still out there, a phantom threat, but for now, in the stillness of the desert, they had a moment of peace, a moment to breathe, to hope, to rebuild. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work and quiet purpose. Elias, with the help of the girls, slowly began to rebuild the adobe house. The work was grueling, but he had a new sense of purpose that fueled him. The girls, their hands and faces smudged with mud and dirt, were tireless. They mixed the mud, they carried the stones, their small bodies working with a quiet determination that both humbled and inspired him. The adobe house, once a ruin, was slowly beginning to take shape. The walls were standing straight again, the roof was being slowly repaired. It was still a far cry from a home, but it was a beginning. As they worked, the silence between them slowly began to fill with words. Lainey, the youngest, was the first to open up. She told him stories of her mother, of the songs she used to sing, of the way she used to braid her hair. Her voice, a small melodic sound, filled the air with a bitter-sweet warmth. Elias listened, his heart aching for the loss she had endured. He had lost his own mother, and he understood the profound grief that came with it. Nahimana, with her quiet strength, would sit by the fire at night, carving small figures out of wood. She carved a wolf, a hawk, a lizard. They were all animals of the desert, and they were all fierce, beautiful, and wild. He saw in her carvings a reflection of herself, of her untamed spirit, of her will to survive. Ilara, the eldest, was a portrait of quiet dignity. She would watch him as he worked, her eyes a mirror of her thoughts. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, she asked him, "Did you ever have a family?" Elias looked at her, and for the first time he saw a woman, not a girl. He saw the scars of her past, the wisdom of her heart. He saw himself in her, a person who had lost everything and had to build a new life from the ashes. "I did," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A mother, a father, a sister. The war took them from me. Not directly, but it took me away, and when I came back, they were gone. The land had taken them back." Elara nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. They were both children of loss, people who had been broken and were now trying to heal. He wasn't just a guardian, he was a companion in grief. He was a person who understood their pain, their loneliness, their fear. The trust that had been a whisper was now a quiet truth. They were a family, not by blood, but by circumstance, by a shared pain and a shared hope. They were bound by the past and united by a desire for a future. The bounty hunters were still a distant threat, a phantom menace, but for now they had each other. The adobe house was a symbol of their fragile peace. It was a place where they were building not just a home, but a new life. It was a place where they were learning to trust again, to hope again, to live again. The desert, once a symbol of loneliness, was now a sanctuary. The work on the adobe house was going well, but they were running dangerously low on supplies. Elias had to make another trip to a town. This time he would not go alone. He had to be careful to be a ghost, and to do that, he needed an extra set of eyes, a warning system. He chose Nahimana. She was the best scout of the three, her senses sharp, her mind quick. She was a warrior, and she would be an invaluable asset. He had to be careful, though. She was a child, and the town was a dangerous place. "You'll ride with me," he said to her, his voice low and serious. "You'll be my eyes. If you see anything at all, you tell me, no matter what." Nahimana nodded, her face a mask of determination. She was ready. She had been waiting for this. She had been waiting for a chance to prove herself, to be a part of the fight. He found some old stained clothes in a chest he had found in the ruins. He had her put them on. She would look like a simple desert girl, not an Apache runaway. He had her pull her hair back to hide the intricate braids. He was trying to make her a ghost, a shadow, a person who wouldn't be noticed. The ride to town was tense. Nahimana sat behind him on Ghost, her body a small, tense thing. Her eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the horizon. Elias felt a new kind of fear, a fear for a life that wasn't his own. He was a soldier, a fighter, but he was also a guardian, and the responsibility was a heavy weight on his shoulders. The town, a small collection of wooden shacks and dust-caked buildings, was even smaller than Redemption. It was a place for prospectors, for weary travelers. It was a place of shadows and secrets. He led Ghost to a secluded part of town, near a livery stable. "Stay here," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Don't talk to anyone, don't look at anyone. Just wait for me. I'll be back as soon as I can." Nahimana nodded, her eyes fixed on his. She was a silent promise, a vow of trust. He went to the general store, his senses on high alert. He bought flour, salt, coffee, and ammunition. The store owner, a wizened old man with a face like a dried apple, looked at him with a casual curiosity. "You new here, son?" he asked. "Just passing through," Elias said, his voice flat. "Good. This ain't a good place to stay, too many shadows." Elias paid for his supplies and left the store, his heart pounding. He had to get out of here. The air was thick with a sense of unease, a feeling that something was wrong. He walked back to the livery stable. Nahimana was gone. A cold, sickening dread washed over him. He ran to the spot where he had left her, his mind a blur of panic. He saw a few hoofprints in the dirt, a few scuff marks. She had been taken. He ran to Ghost, his heart a frantic drum. He had to find her. He had to. He was a guardian, and he had failed. He had put her in danger, and now he had to pay for it. He would not stop until he found her. He would not stop until she was safe. He would not stop until he was dead. The West was a dangerous place, and he had just learned a hard lesson. A lesson in trust, in fear, in the terrible price of love. Elias was a man of the hunt. He had tracked men and animals through every kind of terrain, but this was different. This was not a hunt for food or a bounty. This was a hunt for a life he had sworn to protect. He was a wolf, and he was on the scent of his prey. He followed the hoofprints, his senses on high alert. He knew he had to be careful. The men who had taken her were likely bounty hunters, men who had seen her and recognized her. They would be expecting him. They would be ready for a fight. He followed the trail out of town, into the desert. The sun was setting, casting long, ominous shadows. The air was turning cold, but Elias didn't feel it. He was a man of fire, a man of rage. He was a soldier on the warpath, and he would not stop until he had his prize. He found a small hidden camp a few miles from the town. He saw a small fire, the smoke curling into the twilight. He saw 2 horses tied to a post. He saw a small figure tied to a tree. It was Nahimana. He crept closer, his movements a silent ballet of a man who had been a soldier for too long. He saw 2 men sitting by the fire, their faces obscured by the shadows. They were talking, their voices low and muffled. Elias waited, his rifle ready. He had to be smart. He couldn't just rush in. He had to be patient. He had to be a hunter, not a fool. He waited until the fire began to die down, until the men's voices grew softer, more relaxed. He waited for his moment. He heard one of the men laugh, a harsh, grating sound. "The hermit's a fool," he said. "He left her all alone. We'll get a good price for her." Elias's blood ran cold. They were going to sell her. They were going to sell her into a life of slavery, of misery. He had to act. Now. He waited until the men were asleep. He crept closer, his movements a silent prayer. He had to be quick. He had to be silent. He had to be a ghost. He reached the first man. He raised his rifle, and with a swift, brutal motion, he brought it down on the man's head. The man fell, a small, choked gasp escaping his lips. Elias turned to the second man. The man was awake now, his eyes wide with a terrified realization. He reached for his rifle, but it was too late. Elias was on him, his hands a blur of motion. He disarmed the man, and with a quiet, efficient brutality, he ended his life. He went to Nahimana, his heart a frantic drum. He knelt, his large hands untying the rope that bound her. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. She said nothing. She didn't need to. He had come for her. He had not abandoned her. He held her close, his arms a fortress of protection. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice raw. "I shouldn't have left you. I'm sorry." Nahimana simply buried her face in his chest, her small body trembling with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. He took her back to Ghost, and they rode back to their camp. Elias was a different man now. He had fought, he had killed, and he had won. But he had also learned a terrible lesson. He couldn't trust anyone. He couldn't trust the world. He was a man of violence, and his violence was the only thing that could keep them safe. He was a killer, and for the first time in his life, he was not ashamed of it. He was a killer for a purpose. He was a killer for them. Nahimana was a changed child. She was no longer just a scout. She was a survivor of a brutal reality. The experience had forged a new kind of steel within her. She was quieter, more watchful, her eyes holding a knowledge that was far beyond her years. She saw the world with a new clarity, a world that was filled with shadows and dangers. Elias, for his part, was a man consumed by guilt. He had put her in danger, and he had paid a terrible price for his mistake. He had to be better, to be smarter, to be more vigilant. He couldn't afford to be careless, not with their lives. He took Nahimana to a small, isolated canyon, a place he had known since he was a child. It was a place of solitude, a place where they could be safe. He found a small cave, its entrance hidden by a low overhang of rock. It would be their new home, a temporary one, a place to heal and to plan. Nahimana, with her usual quiet purpose, began to explore the canyon. She found a small spring, its water a cool, life-giving stream in the barren landscape. She found a small hidden garden, a place where wild sage and desert flowers grew in abundance. She was a child of the land, a child who had been broken, but was now healing. Elias, meanwhile, began to prepare for the inevitable. The bounty hunters would be on their trail soon. He had killed 2 of their own, and they would not rest until they had their revenge. He had to be a ghost, a phantom in the sand. He had to make sure they couldn't find them. He began to create a series of false trails, a network of confusion that would lead the bounty hunters on a wild goose chase. He led them through canyons, over mountains, and through the endless, unforgiving desert. He was a master of the hunt, and he was using his skills to protect, not to destroy. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, Nahimana came to him. She was holding a small piece of wood, a small, beautiful carving of a wolf. She handed it to him, her eyes a mirror of her soul. "Thank you," she said, her voice a small, quiet whisper, "for saving me." Elias looked at her, his heart a drum. He took the carving, his fingers tracing the beautiful lines. It was more than a carving. It was a promise. It was a symbol of her trust, a vow of her loyalty. He had failed her, but she had forgiven him. She had chosen to trust him still. He looked at her, and he saw a girl who had been through hell and had come out of it stronger. He saw a warrior, a survivor, a person who would one day be a leader, a person who would one day be a legend. He was just a small part of her story, a small part of her journey. The bounty hunters were still out there, a phantom menace. But they were just men. They were not ghosts. They were not wolves. They were not survivors of a broken world. And he was. And so were the girls. The desert was their sanctuary, their home, their fortress. And he was its guardian. The canyon became their new sanctuary, a place where they could breathe, where they could be safe. The bounty hunters were still out there, a phantom menace, but they were no longer a direct threat. Elias had outwitted them, at least for now. He had led them on a wild goose chase, and he had bought them some time. He had to be careful, though. The desert was a harsh and unforgiving place, and they were at its mercy. They had to ration their water, their food, their supplies. He had to teach the girls how to survive in this new world, to be a part of the land, not a victim of it. He taught them how to find water in the most unlikely of places, how to read the stars, how to hunt for food. He taught them how to be quiet, to be patient, to be a part of the silence. He was a soldier, a killer, but he was also a teacher, a guardian, a man who was building a new life for 3 small lives. Ilara, with her quiet dignity, was a quick learner. She learned how to set snares, how to identify edible plants, how to make a fire from a few sticks and a stone. She was a natural leader, and her spirit, a fierce, untamed thing, was a constant source of wonder to Elias. She was a woman in the making, and she was a survivor. Lainey, the youngest, was a small, quiet shadow. She learned to be a part of the silence, to move with a grace that was a testament to her heritage. She learned to find beauty in the most unexpected places, a perfect desert flower, a smooth river stone, a small, delicate lizard. She was a child of the desert, and she was a constant reminder of the life they were fighting for. Nahimana, with her quiet strength, was a master of the hunt. She learned to track, to stalk, to kill. She was a warrior, a natural hunter, and her spirit, a fierce, untamed thing, was a constant source of inspiration to Elias. She was a reminder of the raw power of the human spirit, a spirit that could be broken, but could also be mended. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. They were a family, a small, broken, and beautiful family. They were bound by the past, by the shared trauma of their lives, but they were also united by a desire for a future. They were a small, silent tribe, a family of outcasts, a family of survivors. The desert was a harsh and unforgiving teacher, but it was also a kind one. It taught them to be patient, to be quiet, to be a part of the silence. It taught them to be a part of the world, not a victim of it. Elias was a different man now. He was no longer a man running from his past. He was a man running for his future, for the future of 3 children who had chosen to trust him with their lives. He was a guardian, a protector, a man who was building a new life from the ashes of the old. The bounty hunters were a constant threat, but they were just men. They were not ghosts. They were not wolves. They were not survivors of a broken world. And he was. And so were the girls. The desert was their sanctuary, their home, their fortress, and he was its guardian. The long, grueling months in the desert had hardened them all, but they had also given them a new kind of strength. The girls were no longer just children. They were survivors, warriors in their own right. They were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a testament to the power of hope. Elias, for his part, was a man transformed. The anger, the rage, the pain that had been a constant companion for years had slowly begun to recede. He was no longer a man defined by his past, but a man defined by his purpose. He was a guardian, a protector, a man who had found his redemption in the most unlikely of circumstances. One morning, as the sun rose over the red rock formations, he saw it, a faint plume of smoke in the distance. It was too close. They had been found. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drum of panic. He had to be careful. He couldn't risk a confrontation. He had to be a ghost, a phantom in the sand. He gathered the girls. his voice a low, urgent whisper. "They're here," he said. "We have to go, now." The girls didn't ask questions. They simply gathered their meager belongings, their movements a blur of practiced efficiency. They were ready. They were fighters. They were survivors. Elias led them through a series of narrow, winding canyons, a maze of rock and sand that would be impossible for the bounty hunters to navigate. He was a man of the land, a man who had been a part of this landscape since he was a child. He was home, and he would not let them be taken from his home. As they traveled, the girls talked. They talked about their dreams, about their hopes, about the future they were building. They talked about a new life, a life of peace, a life without fear. It was a small, fragile dream, but it was a dream nonetheless. Elias listened, his heart a drum of hope. He had no dreams of his own. His life was a series of choices, a series of battles. But their dreams were his now. Their hope was his. Their future was his purpose. He led them to a high plateau, a place with a panoramic view of the desert. He saw them then, a small, dark cloud of men on horseback, their movements a frantic, confused search for a trail that didn't exist. They were lost. They were beaten. They were gone. A wave of relief washed over Elias, a wave so strong it almost brought him to his knees. They were safe. For now, he had won. He had outwitted them. He had bought them another day, another week, another month. He looked at the girls. They were looking at him, their faces a mixture of gratitude and relief. They knew what had just happened. They knew the danger they had just escaped. They knew that he had saved them, again. He looked at the horizon, at the endless expanse of the desert. The bounty hunters were just a small, distant memory now. But the memory was still there, a constant reminder of the world that was waiting for them. He knew he couldn't hide forever. He had to find a new life for them, a new home, a place where they could be safe. He had a plan, a crazy, desperate plan. He would go to a small, isolated Apache village, a village that he had heard about from a few travelers. He would try to find their family, to find a place where they could truly belong. It was a risky move, a move that could lead to his death. But it was the only move he had left. He had to give them a future. He had to give them a home. He had to give them a life. The journey to the Apache village was a long and arduous one. They traveled by night and rested during the day, their movements a silent, ghostly procession through the desert. Elias was a man on a mission, a man with a purpose that resonated in every step he took. He was not just a guardian anymore. He was a deliverer. He had heard stories of the village, a small, isolated community that had chosen to live in peace with the white man. It was a risk, a dangerous gamble, but it was their only hope. He had to trust that they would accept them, that they would give them a home. He had told the girls his plan. They had been silent at first, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. They had lost their family, their home, their world. They had to be careful. They had to be sure. "We have to be honest," Ilara had said, her voice a small, quiet thing. "We have to tell them everything about the bounty hunters, about you, about us." Elias had agreed. He had to be truthful. He couldn't hide his past, his actions. He was a man who had killed, and he would not lie about it. He would tell them the truth, and he would let them decide their own fate. As they neared the village, a new sense of unease settled over him. He was a white man, a former soldier, a man who had killed a few of their own. He was a stranger, a ghost, a man who was not welcome in this world. He was a fool, but he had to do it. He had to try. He had a promise to keep. They saw the village from a distance, a small collection of adobe houses and teepees, a plume of smoke curling lazily into the sky. It was a peaceful sight, a place of sanctuary. It was a place of hope. Elias stopped, his heart a frantic drum. He had to be careful. He had to be smart. He had to show them that he was a man of peace, a man who had come to them in good faith. He had to show them that he was not a threat. He took off his rifle and laid it on the ground. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace. He was a man of war, but he was here for peace. He was a killer, but he was here to save lives. He watched as a few figures emerged from the village, their faces a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They were a small, quiet group, their movements graceful and deliberate. They were a people who had survived, a people who had learned to be careful. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest. He was a man with a promise to 3 small lives that had come to depend on him, a promise to a future that was not his own. He was a deliverer, a guardian, a man who had found his redemption in the most unlikely of circumstances. And he would not fail. The journey was over. The promise was about to be fulfilled. The Apache figures approached with a silent grace, their movements cautious but not hostile. Elias remained still, his hands held high in a gesture of peace, the rifle he had laid on the ground a testament to his intentions. The girls huddled behind him, their small bodies a testament to his promise. An older man, his face a roadmap of lines and wisdom, stepped forward. His hair was long and white, his eyes a deep, knowing dark. He spoke in a low, even tone, a language Elias didn't understand but whose intent was clear. "Why are you here?" Ilara stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly but resolute. She spoke in her native tongue, her words a torrent of explanation. She told him of the river, of the bounty hunters, of Elias's rescue and their long journey. Elias watched the old man's face as Ilara spoke. He saw a flicker of surprise, a hint of suspicion, and finally a slow, grudging acceptance. The old man's eyes fell upon Elias, a deep and penetrating gaze that seemed to see straight through him, to the soldier he once was and the man he was trying to be. The old man, whose name Elias would come to learn was Chief Hana, nodded slowly. He spoke again, his words a command. Two young men, warriors, approached Elias. They picked up his rifle and his supplies, their movements silent and efficient. It was a test of trust. Elias did not resist. He simply stood there, a man of war now disarmed, and at the mercy of the very people he had once fought against. Chief Hana motioned for them to follow. The village was a collection of teepees and small adobe huts, a peaceful oasis in the harsh desert. People watched them as they passed, their faces a mixture of curiosity and a deep, ingrained wariness. Elias knew that their presence was a violation of a fragile peace, a risk to their way of life. He had brought them a problem, a potential war. He was given a small empty teepee. It was Spartan but clean, and it was a shelter. The girls were taken by an older woman, their hair and clothes cleaned, their small bodies given a warm meal. Elias was given a bowl of stew, a silent offering of a temporary truce. He ate in silence, his mind a whirl of questions and fears. What would they do with him? Would they keep the girls? Would they turn him away? He was a ghost in their midst, a man who didn't belong. Later that evening, Chief Hana came to his teepee. He sat on the floor, his presence a quiet, powerful thing. He spoke to Elias in a halting, broken English, a language he had learned through long years of conflict and negotiation. "You are a good man," he said. "You saved our children. You are a good man." Elias looked at him, his heart a raw and exposed thing. "I did what I had to do," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I couldn't leave them." "The bounty hunters," Chief Hana said, his eyes narrowing. "They are a disease. They do not rest. They will come for them. They will come for you." Elias nodded. "I know. I tried to lead them away. But they will not stop. Not for a reward. They are looking for something more." Chief Hana was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the fire. "They will not find them here," he said, his voice a low, firm promise. "This is our land. This is our sanctuary." He looked at Elias, a new question in his eyes. You are a warrior. Why do you protect them?" Elias looked at the fire, and he thought of Laney's small hand in his, of Nahimana's fierce spirit, of Ilara's quiet dignity. He thought of the war, of the hatred, of the death. He thought of his own broken life and the new purpose he had found. "Because," he said, his voice raw with a pain that was a lifetime old, "there's a difference between a man who fights for a cause and a man who fights to protect a life. I am the second." Chief Hana nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible gesture. He had seen too much war, too much death, he understood. He saw in Elias a mirror of his own weariness. He saw a man who had chosen to be different, to stand on his own against the tide of hate. The truce was now a fragile reality, a new beginning in a world that was filled with old hatreds. The journey was not over. It was just beginning. The days in the Apache village were a study in contrast for Elias. The world he had known was one of solitary survival, a constant battle against the elements and other men. Here he was surrounded by a community, a living, breathing testament to a life he had never known. The village was a hub of quiet activity. Women wove baskets and prepared food. Men tended to the livestock and sharpened tools, and children played, their laughter a sound that was both foreign and profoundly beautiful to his ears. He was a ghost in their midst, a silent shadow. He was given tasks, simple ones at first, chopping wood, fetching water, mending fences. He worked without complaint, his movements efficient and his mind on constant alert. He was always watching, always listening. He knew that his presence was a burden, a risk to their way of life. He had to earn his keep. He had to prove that he was worthy of their trust. The girls, meanwhile, were flourishing. They were home. Lainey, the youngest, ran and played with the other children, her laughter a constant melody. She had found a new family, a new sense of belonging. Nahimana, with her fierce, untamed spirit, was learning from the other warriors. She was practicing with a bow and arrow, her movements fluid and her aim true. She was a warrior, and she was in her element. Ilara was with the women, learning to weave, to prepare food, to be a part of a community. She was a leader in her own right, and she had found her place among her people. Elias watched them, his heart a mixture of joy and a deep, profound sadness. He had brought them here, to a place where they could be safe, where they could be whole. He had fulfilled his promise. But now he was alone again. He was a man who had delivered a precious package, and now he was left with the emptiness of his own soul. The solitude he had once craved was now a heavy cloak, a constant reminder of his own isolation. He was given a small hut to live in, a simple adobe structure with a fire pit. It was home for now. But he knew it wasn't his home. He was a guest, a stranger, a man who had no place in this world. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, he heard a sound, a quiet sound, a familiar one. He looked up, and he saw Ilara standing in the entrance of his hut. She was holding a small bowl of stew. She didn't speak. She simply handed it to him, her eyes a mirror of her soul. Elias took the bowl, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble. She sat with him, a comfortable silence settling between them. He ate his stew, and she watched him, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. She knew what he was feeling. She knew the weight of a secret, the loneliness of a life on the run. She spoke then, her voice a small, quiet thing. "My father, he was a good man. He was a hunter. He loved our family. He died defending us. He was a good man." Elias looked at her. He saw in her eyes a grief that was too old for her years. He saw a girl who had lost everything. He saw a girl who was trying to heal, to find a new life from the ashes of the old. He had saved her, but she had saved him too. She had given him a purpose, a reason to fight. She had given him a life. He finished his stew, and he looked at her. "Your father, he was a good man," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was a good man, and he would be proud of you. He would be proud of who you are." Ilara's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, a small, sad smile on her lips. She got up to leave, and he watched her go, his heart a mixture of sadness and a deep, profound gratitude. He had a secret, a heavy one, but he was no longer alone in carrying it. He had a family now, a family that was not his own, but a family nonetheless. And for the first time in his life, he was not just a soldier. He was a part of something, a part of a promise he had made long ago, a promise he had fulfilled. The fragile peace in the Apache village was shattered by the arrival of the bounty hunters. They came in the morning, a dark cloud of men on horseback, their faces hard and their eyes a cold calculation of greed. Elias, who had been training with a few of the warriors, saw them first. He felt a cold dread wash over him, a familiar, sickening feeling. He had been a fool. He had brought a plague to a sanctuary. Chief Hana, his face a grim mask, went to the center of the village, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. The bounty hunters dismounted, their leader a scarred, brutal-looking man with a cruel smile. He spoke in a loud, booming voice, his words a direct challenge. "We know you're in there, hermit," he yelled, his voice echoing through the peaceful village. "We know you're hiding them. We know you killed our men. We want the girls, and we want you." The Apache warriors, their faces grim, raised their bows and arrows. The bounty hunters, their rifles raised, were ready for a fight. The tension was a palpable thing, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Elias knew he had to act. He had brought this upon them. He had to be the one to end it. He stepped forward, his body a shield, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "Let the girls go," he yelled, They have nothing to do with this. This is between us. The leader of the bounty hunters, his cruel smile widening, looked at him. Elias, he said, his voice a low sneer. The hermit, the man who killed my brother. You think you can hide from me? You think you can escape? Elias looked at him, his face a hard, unyielding mask. I'm not hiding, he said. I'm protecting, and I will not let you have them. The bounty hunter laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You're a fool, Elias. You're a fool to fight for them. They're just a bounty, a prize, nothing more. Elias looked at him, and he saw a man who had lost his soul. He saw a man who had nothing to fight for but money. He saw a man who was empty. They're not a bounty, Elias said, his voice a low, powerful thing. They're a family, and they're my family, and I will die before I let you have them. The bounty hunter's smile vanished. He raised his rifle, his finger on the trigger. Then die, hermit. Chief Hana, his eyes filled with a grim determination, raised his hand. The Apache warriors, their bows drawn, were ready to fire. The bounty hunters, their rifles raised, were ready for a bloodbath. Elias, with a new sense of purpose, looked at the chief. Let me do this, he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. This is my fight. This is my responsibility. This is my atonement. Chief Hana was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Elias. He saw the fire in his eyes, the determination in his heart. He saw a man who was ready to die for a cause he believed in. He saw a man who had been broken but was now whole. He saw a warrior. He slowly lowered his hand, a silent command to his warriors. The bounty hunters, their eyes wide with confusion, looked at each other. They had expected a fight, not a surrender. They had expected a battle, not a sacrifice. Elias looked at the leader of the bounty hunters, his face a hard, unyielding mask. Let's end this, he said. Just you and me. No one else has to die. No one else has to get hurt. The bounty hunter's smile returned. He looked at Elias, a triumphant glint in his eyes. He had him. He had him where he wanted him. He had his revenge. He had his prize. Fine, he said, his voice a low sneer. Let's end this. Let's see who the better man is. The bounty hunters slowly backed away, their faces a mixture of confusion and a deep, cruel satisfaction. They were getting what they came for, a fight, a bloodbath, a show. Elias looked at the chief. I'm sorry, he said, his voice raw. I'm sorry I brought this to your home. Chief Hana simply nodded, his eyes filled with a sad, profound understanding. He had seen too much war, too much death. He knew that sometimes a battle was the only way to find peace. He knew that sometimes a man had to die to live. The truce was broken. The battle was about to begin. The ghosts of the past were back, and they were ready for a fight. The space between Elias and the bounty hunter leader felt like a lifetime. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of the wind whipping across the sand. The men stood in a circle, the Apache warriors on one side, the bounty hunters on the other, a silent audience to a deadly dance. The sun beat down with an unrelenting intensity, and the air was thick with the dust of 1,000 years. The bounty hunter leader, his name Jeb, was a man of pure malice. His eyes held a cold, calculating cruelty, his face a scarred and brutal mask. He was a man who had no honor, no code. He was a killer, a predator, and he was ready for a fight. Elias, by contrast, was a man of quiet purpose. He was not a killer. He was a protector. He was a man who had found his purpose in the most unlikely of circumstances. He was a soldier, yes, but he was also a guardian. He was a man who had found his soul. You're a fool, hermit, Jeb said, his voice a low sneer. You should have just let them go. You should have just taken your money and run. Now you're going to die for nothing. Elias looked at him, his face a hard, unyielding mask. They're not nothing, he said, his voice a low, powerful thing. They're everything. They're a family, and they're a life that's worth fighting for. Jeb laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You're a man of words, hermit, but I'm a man of action. Let's see what you're made of. He drew his knife, a long, brutal-looking thing, and he lunged. Elias was ready. He moved with a speed and ferocity that had been honed on the battlefield. He dodged the attack, his body a blur of motion. He had no weapon, only his hands, his strength, his will to live. The fight was a brutal, physical thing. Jeb was a savage fighter, his movements fueled by rage and a deep, burning hatred. Elias, by contrast, was a methodical fighter. his movements precise and his mind focused. He was a soldier, and he was fighting for a cause he believed in. Jeb swung his knife, a brutal slashing motion. Elias parried, his arm a shield against the blade. He took a hit, a small shallow cut on his arm, and he felt the sting of the blood. But he didn't falter. He simply looked at the bounty hunter, a grim determination in his eyes. He saw his chance. Jeb lunged again, a furious, uncontrolled attack. Elias dodged, and in that split second, he saw his opening. He moved with a speed and a grace that was a testament to his years as a soldier. He grabbed Jeb's arm, his fingers a vice, and with a swift, brutal motion, he snapped the bone. Jeb screamed, a raw, primal sound of pain and rage. He fell to the ground, his face a mask of shock and a deep, profound defeat. He had been beaten. He had been humiliated. He had been broken. Elias stood over him, his chest heaving. He had won. He had won the battle, but he knew the war was not over. "You're not a hero, Hermit," Jeb rasped, his voice a broken whisper. "You're just a man who's going to die. There are more of us. We'll find you. We'll find the girls, and we'll kill you all." Elias looked at him, his face a hard, unyielding mask. "Maybe," he said, "but not today. Today, you're going to tell your men to leave. Today, you're going to tell them that you lost. Today, you're going to tell them to never come back, or I will kill you, and I will make sure your men know why." Jeb looked at him, and he saw a man who was not a fool. He saw a man who was not a hero. He saw a man who was a warrior. He saw a man who was a ghost. He was beaten. He was broken. He was a man who had lost everything. He slowly, painfully, got to his feet. He looked at his men, his face a mask of defeat. "We're leaving," he said, his voice a raw, broken whisper. "We're leaving now. We're going to tell them that we lost. We're going to tell them that the Hermit is not a man to be messed with." He slowly, painfully walked to his horse. He mounted it and he rode away, a broken man on a broken horse. The other bounty hunters, their faces a mixture of confusion and a deep, profound fear, followed him. The circle was broken. The duel was over. The peace was restored. But Elias knew. He knew that the peace was a fragile, temporary thing. He knew that the war was not over. He knew that he was a man who had just won a battle, but a man who was still fighting a war. The peace in the Apache village was a new, fragile thing. The bounty hunters were gone, their presence a bitter taste in the air, but the memory lingered. The Apache people looked at Elias with a new kind of respect, a new kind of understanding. He was no longer just a ghost, a stranger. He was a warrior. He was a man who had fought for them, who had bled for them, who had won for them. Chief Hana came to him that evening, his eyes filled with a deep, profound gratitude. "You have honored us," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "You have fought for our people. You have saved our children. We are in your debt." Elias looked at him, his face a somber mask. "I did what I had to do," he said. "I did what was right. There is no debt. I was just a man who was in the right place at the right time." "No," Chief Hana said, his voice a low, firm promise. "You are more than a man. You are a warrior, you are a ghost, you are a protector, and you are welcome here. Your home. It is now our home. Your family. It is now our family." Elias looked at him, his heart a drum of 100 different emotions. Gratitude, relief, a deep, profound sense of belonging. He had been a man alone for so long, a man who had no home, no family, no purpose. He had been a man who had been defined by his past, by the war, by the death. But now he was a man who was defined by his future, by the life he had found, by the family he had built. The girls, their faces filled with a new kind of joy, came to him. They hugged him, their small bodies a testament to a love he had never known. Lainey, the youngest, hugged him tightly, her small body a shield against the ghosts of his past. Nahimana, with her fierce, untamed spirit, hugged him fiercely, her body a silent promise of a loyalty that would last a lifetime. Ilara, with her quiet dignity, hugged him tightly, her body a testament to a bond that was stronger than blood. He had found his purpose. He had found his home. He had found his family. He was a ghost, yes, but he was no longer a ghost of a man. He was a ghost of a soldier, a ghost of a past that no longer defined him. He was a man who was defined by his future, by the life he had found, by the love he had built. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Elias began to train the young Apache warriors. He taught them how to fight, how to survive, how to be a ghost in the sand. He taught them how to be a soldier, a protector, a man who would fight for his people, for his family, for his home. He was a mentor, a leader, a man who was teaching a new generation of warriors how to fight, how to survive, how to live. He was a man who was giving back, a man who was atoning for a past he could not change. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, he looked at his hands. They were covered in dirt, in calluses, in the small, beautiful scars of a life lived on the edge. He had been a man of violence, a man of war, but now he was a man of peace, a man of love. He was a man who had been broken, but was now whole. He was a man who had been lost, but was now found. The ghost of a soldier was gone. In its place was a man, a guardian, a protector, a man who had found his purpose, his home, his family. The journey was not over. The war was not over. But for now, he was home, and that was all that mattered. The peace in the Apache village was a new, fragile thing. The bounty hunters were gone, their presence a bitter taste in the air, but the memory lingered. The Apache people looked at Elias with a new kind of respect, a new kind of understanding. He was no longer just a ghost, a stranger. He was a warrior. He was a man who had fought for them, who had bled for them, who had won for them. But Elias knew. He knew that the peace was a temporary thing. He knew that the war was not over. The bounty hunters were not a single entity. They were a brotherhood of violence and greed. He knew that they would be back. They would not rest until they had their revenge. He began to prepare. He taught the young warriors how to fortify the village, how to build traps, how to be a ghost in the sand. He was a man of war, a man who had been trained in the art of destruction, but now he was using his skills to protect, to build, to create. He was a mentor, a leader, a man who was teaching a new generation of warriors how to fight, how to survive, how to live. He was a man who was atoning for a past he could not change. One morning, as the sun rose over the red rock formations, he saw it. A faint plume of smoke in the distance. It was too close. They were back. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drum of panic. He had to be careful. He couldn't risk a confrontation. He had to be a ghost, a phantom in the sand. He gathered the warriors, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "They're here," he said. "They've come back. They've come for us." The warriors, their faces grim, raised their bows and arrows. They were ready for a fight. They were ready for a war. They were ready for anything. Elias had a plan, a desperate final gamble. He would go to them. He would face them. He would end this once and for all. He couldn't risk the village. He couldn't risk the girls. He had to be the one to die. He gathered his gear, his rifle, his knife, his ammunition. He was a man of war, a man who had been trained to kill. He was a man who was ready to die. Chief Hana, his face a grim mask, stood in his way. "No," he said, his voice a low, firm promise. "You are our warrior. You are our protector. We will not let you die alone. We will fight with you. We will die with you. We are your family." Elias looked at him, his heart a drum of 100 different emotions. He was not alone. He was a part of something, a part of a family, a part of a promise he had made long ago. He was a man who had been lost, but was now found. He was a man who had been broken, but was now whole. He was a man who was defined by his future, by the life he had found, by the love he had built. The bounty hunters, a dark cloud of men on horseback, were nearing the village. They were ready for a fight. They were ready for a war. They were ready for a bloodbath. Elias, with a new sense of purpose, looked at the warriors. "We will fight," he said, his voice a low, powerful thing. "We will fight for our family. We will fight for our home. We will fight for our lives. We will fight for our future." The warriors, their faces filled with a new kind of courage, raised their bows and arrows. They were ready. They were a people who had been pushed to the edge, a people who had been broken, but were now whole. They were a people who were ready to fight for their lives. The final battle was about to begin. The ghosts of the past were back, and they were ready for a war. But Elias was ready too. He was a ghost, a phantom, a man who had been lost, but was now found. He was a warrior, a protector, a man who was ready to die for a cause he believed in. He was a man who was ready to fight for his family. He was a man who was ready to fight for his home. He was a man who was ready to fight for his future. The air crackled with a cold electric tension. The bounty hunters, a dark cloud of men on horseback, surrounded the village. Elias stood at the head of the Apache warriors, his rifle in his hands, his face a grim mask of resolve. He was a man of war, a man who had been trained to kill. But now he was fighting for a different reason. He was fighting for his family. The leader of the bounty hunters, a brutal, scarred man, rode to the center of the circle. "We know you're in there, hermit," he yelled, his voice a low sneer. "We know you're hiding them. We know you killed our men. We want the girls. And we want you." Elias looked at him, his face a hard, unyielding mask. "They're not a bounty," he said, his voice a low, powerful thing. "They're a family, and they're my family, and I will die before I let you have them." The bounty hunter laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You're a fool, hermit. You're a fool to fight for them. They're just a bounty, a prize, nothing more." Elias looked at him, and he saw a man who had no soul. He saw a man who had nothing to fight for but money. He saw a man who was empty. "They're not a bounty," Elias said, his voice a low, powerful thing. "They're a family, and they're a life that's worth fighting for." The bounty hunter's smile vanished. He raised his rifle, his finger on the trigger. "Then die, hermit!" The bounty hunters charged, a dark, menacing cloud of men and horses. The Apache warriors, their faces grim, raised their bows and arrows. The battle for the village, for the lives of the girls, for the future of a people, had begun. Elias was a force of nature. He moved with a speed and a ferocity that had been honed on the battlefield. He fired his rifle, his aim true, his movements precise. He was a ghost, a phantom, a man who had been trained to kill. But now he was using his skills to protect, to build, to create. The battle was a brutal, physical thing. The air was filled with the sound of gunshots, of arrows, of the screams of men and the cries of horses. Elias fought with a cold, methodical purpose. He was not a man of rage, but a man of steel. He was a man who was fighting for a cause he believed in. He saw the leader of the bounty hunters, a brutal, scarred man, his face a mask of rage. He was coming for him. He was coming for his revenge. He was coming for his prize. Elias raised his rifle, his aim true. He was a soldier, a killer, a man who had been trained to kill, but he had a different purpose now. He was a guardian, a protector, a man who was fighting for his family. He fired, and the bounty hunter leader fell, a small dark hole in his chest. He was gone. He was a ghost. He was a man who had been defined by his past, by his greed, by his hatred. The battle was over. The bounty hunters, their leader gone, their will to fight broken, turned and fled. They were a defeated army, a ghost of a war that was long over. They were a reminder of the darkness that was still out there, a darkness that was waiting for them. Elias looked at the village. The people were battered, bruised, but they were alive. The girls, their faces streaked with tears and dirt, were safe. They were home. He was a man who had been broken, but was now whole. He was a man who had been lost, but was now found. He was a man who had been a ghost, but was now a hero. He was a man who had found his purpose, his home, his family, and he would not let them go. The war was over. The promise was kept. The journey was just beginning. The days following the final battle were a time of rebuilding and healing. The Apache village, though scarred, was still standing, a testament to the resilience of its people. Elias, now a respected member of the community, worked alongside the others, his hands a constant blur of motion. He helped mend the adobe walls, tend to the wounded, and bury the dead. He was no longer a ghost in their midst, but a living, breathing part of their world. The bounty hunters were gone, their presence a bitter memory. Their defeat had sent a clear message. This village was not a place to be trifled with. The bounty on the girls was now a moot point. The men who sought it were either dead or broken. The girls, for the first time in their young lives, were truly safe. Lainey, the youngest, had shed her shell of fear. Her laughter echoed through the village as she played with the other children, her small hands busy with weaving baskets, and her mind filled with the stories of her people. She was a child again, and a light had returned to her eyes. Nahimana, with her fierce spirit, had become a student of Elias's. She was learning from him not just how to fight, but how to lead. She was a natural warrior, but Elias was teaching her how to be a protector, how to use her strength for a purpose, not just for survival. She was becoming a leader, a woman who would one day lead her people. Ilara, with her quiet dignity, had found her voice. She was now a bridge between Elias and her people, a translator of not just words but of cultures. She was teaching him their language, their traditions, their stories, and he, in turn, was sharing his. He was telling her about the world outside, about the war, about a life that was so different from her own. He was a teacher, a guardian, a man who was helping a new generation of leaders to grow. The adobe house that Elias had once called his home was now a part of the village. It was a place for the girls to learn, a place for the elders to tell stories, a place where the community could gather. It was a symbol of a new beginning, a symbol of a future that was built on a foundation of trust and a deep, abiding respect. Elias had a new purpose, a new life. He was a man who had been broken, but was now whole. He was a man who had been lost, but was now found. He was a man who had been a ghost, but was now a hero. He was a man who had found his purpose, his home, his family. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, he looked at his hands. They were covered in dirt, in calluses, in the small, beautiful scars of a life lived on the edge. He had been a man of violence, a man of war, but now he was a man of peace, a man of love. He was a man who had been broken, but was now whole. He was a man who had been lost, but was now found. He was a man who was defined by his future, by the life he had found, by the love he had built. The journey was not over. The war was not over. But for now, he was home, and that was all that mattered. The Apache village was now a place of peace, a place of hope. The bounty hunters were a distant memory, a bitter taste in the air. The girls were a constant reminder of the life that was now theirs, a life that was built on a foundation of trust and a deep, abiding respect. Elias, now a respected elder in the village, was a man of quiet wisdom. He was a teacher, a guardian, a man who was helping a new generation of leaders to grow. He was teaching the young warriors how to fight, how to survive, how to live. He was a man who was atoning for a past he could not change. One morning, as the sun rose over the red rock formations, he saw it, a faint plume of smoke in the distance. It was not a fire, but a message from the outside world. He knew what it meant. The world was changing. The war was over. The old West was dying, and a new one was being born. He gathered the girls, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "The world is changing," he said. "The old ways are dying, the new ways are being born. We have to be ready, we have to be prepared." The girls, their faces a mixture of fear and hope, looked at him. They had been through so much. They had lost so much. But they were survivors. They were fighters. They were ready for anything. Elias had a new purpose, a new mission. He would not just be a guardian of the girls, he would be a guardian of their people. He would be a man who would help them navigate the new world, a world that was filled with a new kind of danger, a new kind of threat. He was a man who had been broken, but was now whole. He was a man who had been lost, but was now found. He was a man who had been a ghost, but was now a hero. He was a man who had found his purpose, his home, his family. The journey was not over. The war was not over. But for now, he was home, and that was all that mattered. He was a guardian, a protector, a man who was building a new life from the ashes of the old. He was a man who was teaching a new generation of warriors how to fight, how to survive, how to live. He was a man who was atoning for a past he could not change. The ghost of a soldier was gone. In its place was a man, a guardian, a protector, a man who had found his purpose, his home, his family, and he would not let them go. The war was over. The promise was kept. The journey was just beginning. The morning sun cast a golden haze over the desert, illuminating the peaceful rhythm of the Apache village. Weeks had passed since the final violent confrontation, and the scars of the battle were slowly fading. The adobe walls were repaired. The air was clear of the dust of conflict, and the laughter of children, once a fragile sound, now echoed with confident joy. Elias, his body healed and his soul at peace, found a new routine. He was no longer just a protector, but a part of the community, a living bridge between two worlds. He taught the young warriors, his movements precise, and his words a low rumble of wisdom, not just about combat, but about a different kind of strength. The strength to build, to forgive, and to lead with a purpose greater than oneself. Nahimana was his most dedicated student, her fierce spirit now tempered with a quiet maturity. She absorbed his lessons on strategy and survival, her eyes reflecting the same deep-seated resolve that he saw in himself. He was not just teaching her how to be a warrior, he was preparing her to be a leader for a new generation, one who could navigate the complexities of a changing world. Elara had blossomed too. She spent her days with the elders, her hands weaving intricate patterns into baskets, but her mind was always reaching beyond the canyon walls. She had a thirst for knowledge, an innate curiosity about the world outside. She would sit with Elias, her voice a soft, melodic hum as she translated the elders' stories for him, and in return, he would tell her tales of the cities, of the iron roads that were crossing the country, and of the changes that were sweeping through the land. He was a keeper of the outside world, a man who could paint a picture of a future that was both exciting and terrifying. He told her about the promise of education, of schools where knowledge could be found in books, a concept that captivated her. She saw it as a path for her people, a way to protect their culture while embracing the new horizon. Lainey was a living testament to their new life. The terror that had once haunted her was gone, replaced by the simple, profound innocence of a child at play. She had found a new family, a home where she was cherished and safe. She adored Bear, who had been brought back to the village by one of the Apache trackers, and the dog was her constant, silent guardian. Her trust, once a fragile thing, was now a deep-rooted faith in the world and the people who lived in it. But even in this newfound peace, Elias felt the pull of a greater purpose. The bounty hunters were defeated, but the world was not without its shadows. The influx of new settlers, the push of the railroad and the greed for land were all new, subtle threats that his adopted family would have to face. He had won the battle against a tangible enemy, but the war against the changing tide of the West was a different beast altogether. He knew he couldn't stay here forever. His presence, a reminder of the violent world outside, was a risk to their tranquil existence. His legacy, he realized, wasn't to be found in his strength or his ability to fight, but in his ability to prepare the girls and their people for the future. He spent his days training, not for a fight, but for a new kind of survival. He taught them about the new laws, the new economy, the new dangers. He was a ghost of the old world, a man who had been a part of a brutal, unforgiving era. But now he was a bridge to the new one, a mentor who would guide them into a future they had never imagined. His promise to them, the unspoken vow he had made on the riverbank, was not just to protect them, but to give them a future where they could be strong, independent and whole. The final act of his redemption, he knew, was to leave, to be a ghost once more, but this time to be a ghost who had given a new horizon to the people he loved. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of fiery orange and deep violet, and as Elias watched it, he felt a sense of peace he had never known. The bounty hunters were gone, but the ghosts of his past were finally laid to rest. He had found his purpose in the heart of a people he had once fought against, and in the love of 3 girls who had become his family. His journey had come to a close, but their story, a story of hope, resilience, and a new beginning, was just about to unfold. The stage was set, not for another fight, but for a new dawn. The decision was made with a heavy heart, but with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Elias knew it was time to leave. The bounty hunters were defeated, the village was safe, and the girls had found their home. His promise had been kept. His presence, a constant reminder of the world's violence, was no longer a necessity, but a risk. He was a ghost of a soldier, a man from a brutal past, and the time had come for the future to take hold. He would have to leave, a silent departure that would be his final and most profound act of love. He spoke with Chief Hana under the cloak of a moonless night, the flickering firelight illuminating the lines of age and wisdom on the old man's face. "My time here is over," Elias said, his voice a low rumble. "I have trained your warriors. I have helped to rebuild your home. The girls, they are safe now. They are where they belong." Chief Hana nodded slowly, his eyes a deep well of understanding. "We knew this day would come," he said, his voice a quiet whisper. "You are not a man of the village. You are a man of the world, a ghost. But you are a ghost who has brought us a gift of life, a gift of peace. We will not forget you, Elias. You will always be a part of us." Elias looked at him, his heart a raw and exposed thing. The gratitude in the old man's eyes was more than he could bear. He had found a family, a home, a purpose, and now he was leaving it all behind. It was the hardest thing he had ever had to do. He had faced death 100 times, but this was a different kind of pain. The pain of a man who had finally found love, only to have to let it go. He went to the girls' hut. They were sleeping, their small forms a testament to the peace they had found. He knelt, his large hand gently stroking Lainey's hair. She stirred, her small hand reaching out to grasp his finger. He held it, a silent vow of a love that would never fade. He moved to Nahimana, her body a coiled spring of potential, a warrior in her sleep. He placed a small, carved wolf on her pillow, a symbol of her spirit, a silent reminder of the lessons he had taught her. She would lead, she would be strong, she would be a leader for her people. Finally, he went to Ilara. She was awake, her eyes wide and filled with a deep, profound sadness. She had known he would leave. She had seen it in his eyes, in his quiet preparations, in the long, thoughtful silences he had kept. "You are leaving," she said, her voice a small, broken whisper. Elias nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yes," he said, "I have to. My presence, it is a reminder of the hatred and violence you have escaped. Your people need to be free of that. They need to be free of me." Ilara's eyes filled with tears, her face a mask of sorrow. "We are your family," she said. "We are your people. You are a part of us. You are a good man. You are not a ghost." "I am a ghost," he said, his voice raw with a pain that was a lifetime old. "But I am a ghost who will always be with you. I am a ghost who will watch over you. I am a ghost who will always love you." He handed her a small, worn pouch, its contents a small, precious collection of gold coins he had saved over the years. "This is for you," he said, "for your education, for your future, for your people. Use it wisely. Use it to build a new horizon for your people. Use it to build a bridge to a new world." Ilara took the pouch, her hands trembling. She knew what it meant. It was a promise. It was a legacy. It was an act of love. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a new kind of resolve. "We will not forget you, Elias," she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "We will tell our children about the man who came from the desert, the man who saved us, the man who gave us a new life. We will tell them about our guardian, our hero, our ghost." He looked at her, and he saw a woman, not a girl. He saw a leader, a fighter, a person who would one day be a legend. He had no more words. He simply turned and walked into the night, a silent shadow disappearing into the vast, empty expanse of the desert. He was a ghost once more, a ghost who had given a new life to the people he loved, a ghost who would watch over them forever. The years that followed were a testament to the power of a single act of kindness. Elias, a ghost in the vast American West, traveled a long and lonely road, always a silent observer, a man of the shadows. He was a protector from a distance, a guardian who watched over the Apache village from the high ridges of the desert, his rifle a constant companion, his dog Bear, a silent sentinel by his side. He never returned, never spoke to them again, but he was always there, a silent promise in the night. He was a ghost, yes, but he was a ghost who had a purpose, a ghost who had a family. The gold he had given them was used for its intended purpose. Ilara, with the help of the other elders, used the money to build a small schoolhouse. They hired a teacher, a kind, older woman who was a testament to the changing world, and they began to learn. They learned to read and write, to understand the new laws, to navigate the new world that was slowly but surely encroaching upon their old one. Ilara became a leader, a woman who spoke with a clear, resonant voice, a voice that was heard in the council of her people and in the halls of the white man's world. She was a bridge, a translator of two different cultures, a woman who was a testament to the power of knowledge and the strength of a spirit that could not be broken. Nahimana became a warrior, a protector of her people. She was not just a soldier, but a strategist, a leader who was respected by all who knew her. She taught the young warriors the lessons she had learned from Elias, lessons of stealth, of strategy, of a different kind of strength, the strength to protect, to defend, and to lead with a purpose that was greater than oneself. She was a guardian, a woman who was a symbol of the resilience of her people, a woman who was a testament to the power of a spirit that could not be tamed. Lainey, the youngest, grew into a beautiful young woman, her face a living testament to the peace and joy she had found. She became a storyteller, a keeper of her people's history, a woman who would sit by the fire and tell the young children stories of a time before the peace, a time of fear, of pain, of a man who had come from the desert, a man who had saved them, a man who had given them a new life. She would tell them about the hermit, the soldier, the guardian, the man who had no name, the man who was their hero. She would tell them about the ghost. Elias, a silent shadow in the vast American West, watched them from a distance, his heart a mixture of pride and a deep, profound sadness. He was a ghost, a phantom, a man who had no home, no family, no purpose, but he was also a man who had a legacy. He had a family that was not his own, a people who were not his own, a home that was not his own, but they were his, and he was theirs. He lived out his days as a protector, a silent sentinel, a man who had found his purpose in the most unlikely of circumstances. He was a man who had been broken but was now whole. He was a man who had been lost but was now found. He was a man who had been a ghost but was now a hero. And he was a man who had found his purpose, his home, his family. And he would not let them go. The journey was over. The war was over. The promise was kept. The legacy of a ghost, a soldier, a guardian, a man who had been lost, was a life that was now whole, a people who were now safe, a future that was now filled with a new kind of hope. The story of the man on the riverbank was a story of a hero, a man who had no name, a man who had no home, a man who had no family. But he was a man who had a purpose, a man who had a love, a man who had a promise, and that was all that mattered.